precarious pile of books. It's precarious. Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf. Today I'm going to try and do a January wrap-up and maybe talk to you about my reading plans for February. I'm a little ill, so we'll see how far I get with this. If I have to, cancel the mission halfway through, then I will not hesitate to do so. But that is the idea. I've never done a wrap-up before, and it wasn't particularly what I wanted to do when I was starting out with this channel, but I think I've come to see the value of wrap-ups in terms of keeping track of what you've read as much as anything. I don't really know what I've read even since starting this channel because I'm very bad at remembering to record it, so the occasional wrap-up should help with that, although on the whole I'd rather do reviews. You just can't review every single book that you read. That said, it seems like I'm trying. I've got 7 pages of notes for this, so get yourself a cup of tea. I've done a few short reviews in January, and I would like to do a few more of some of the books I'm going to mention today. I've read about 9 books in January, which is pretty good for me, and doing 9 individual reviews would be a bit much. The first book I finished in 2019 was The Return of the Soldier by Rebecca West, which I read on Serial Reader. In this 1918 short novel, a soldier and landowner returns from the trenches having lost 15 years of his memory. For my detailed thoughts on that, I will link my review below and also a review by Joseph Francis Burton, who also read it this month. The second book I finished was Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively from 1987, which was a Christmas present from Roz. In Moon Tiger, the indomitable Claudia is reaching the end of her life and looking back over it with input from the whole of history and all of the other individuals whose lives were linked to hers. Again, I did a longer review of this, which I will link below. The third book I finished was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, which along with The Return of the Soldier is easily one of my favourites of the month. Again, I did a bit of a review of this, which I will link below, but basically Poirot and the village doctor work together to try to figure out who could have killed Roger Ackroyd. It's just a brilliant murder mystery plot. I highly recommend it if you like Agatha Christie's. From a favourite to one that I enjoyed a bit less, the fourth story that I finished was A Lost Lady by Willa Cather, also on Serial Reader. This 1923 novella was pretty alien to me. I know very little about the American West, and I think almost one of the themes of the latter half of this month has been me learning about American culture through reading. This one I haven't done a review of, so as with the other ones that I haven't reviewed already, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it here. A Lost Lady tells the story of the privileged and beautiful Marion Forrester through the eyes of Neil, a boy and later young man from the western town next to her gorgeous hilltop house. At first, I thought this was going to be quite a sentimental eulogy to a deceased perfect lady, but it is actually a bit more complex than that. Marion Forrester may seem to be everything that a good American wife should be, but we and Neil gradually become aware that she has perhaps some romantic issues, perhaps a difficult relationship with alcohol, and a bit of detachment from normal social life. There is a lot in this book about the passage of time and kind of deterioration as time passes. We see characters age and natural spaces become effectively polluted. There is also some use of imagery which can be quite effective. For example, early on in the book, a boy named Ivy Peters goes out of his way to blind a woodpecker, and Neil injures himself trying to help that blinded bird. Ivy Peters goes on to play an insidious role in Mrs. Forrester's life, and it is clear that there is supposed to be some metaphorical significance there. I think it's also relevant that his name is Ivy, and ivy is known to sort of strangle the plants that it clings to. Being from the 1920s, this book had its fair share of casual racism. I also felt that it had a strong narrative of entitlement. This is actually not something that usually bothers me in classic literature. After all, I am an inveterate lover of Jane Austen. However, I just didn't really click with this book or the world that it was trying to convey, which is okay. I mean, we don't have to love everything that we read. Another tale, not exactly a book because it's only 25 pages long, that I finished on the same day, I believe, as A Lost Lady was the Saga of Eirik the Red. However, I did find this one a lot more interesting. So I read the Saga of Eirik the Red in a 1961 translation by Guin Jones as part of Sagalong, a February read-along hosted by Elena Macredina, Steve Donoghue, Totally Pretentious, Richard Reeds, and Biblio Atlas. I hope I've got all of them there. I basically saw the announcement videos for this, and I was sitting in the university library pretending to be a student, as I do. So I looked up on the catalogue to see if the university library had a copy, and it was located literally about 10 metres away from where it was sat, which, given that the university library is split across 4 buildings and 4 stories, was pretty impressive. So I just went and picked it up right away and started reading the first one. The Saga of Eirik the Red, to me, is classic oral history. There is a huge time frame with very inconsistent pacing and no simple plot progression. A broad cast of characters with inconveniently overlapping names. Seriously, everyone's name begins Thor. It's almost like there's some kind of cultural significance to that name. and an eclectic array of themes that are not consistently presented. Things I enjoyed in the Saga of Eirik the Red were the strong female characters. We don't often get that in myth, but this could pretty much equally have been the Saga of Gudrid, as she is almost as much in it as Eirik. Then there is Thorbjorg, the little Sibyl, who has this spiritual leadership role, and Freydis, who plunges into battle and terrifies the enemy with her powerful pregnant body. Freydis is officially my favourite fairy tale princess from now on, even if she was only in about 2 scenes. She was epic. Another interesting aspect was religion. This story is set at the cusp of Christianity being introduced to the Norse realm, and one of the big themes of the saga, if we can say that there are big themes in a tale that is so short, is the spread of the Christian faith and the conflict between it and the old religions. That seemed to particularly come out in times of hardship. So when there is famine, people are pushed back to the older religions, and the text itself almost can't make up its mind on that. Thorbjorg is a pagan seer, but it seems that the things that she predicts comes true, but later on somebody creates a poem to Thor, which seems to bring in a poisoned whale to the settlers, and their famine only resolves when they reject this and turn to Christianity. Characters such as Gudrid are defined by their faith, but also by their pliability to the needs of the community, and Christianity is shown as coming between husband and wife, and disturbing the central rituals of the community, such as how to correctly bury the dead. So historically and sociologically, that was very, very interesting to me. Like Willa Cather, although perhaps more forgivably given that this story is a good millennium old, the writers of this saga were none too familiar with political correctness. But there was something quite fascinating about the description of the Viking interactions with the people that they called the Skraelings, the inhabitants of North America. There is some conflict, but also some cultural interchange, so that was very interesting to hear about and something I was perhaps less aware of. Although I had heard that the Vikings had made it as far as North America, so it was cool to hear the actual story of that. I will be persevering with Sagalong because it is a very timely read-along for me. In just a few days now, Bo and I are heading to Norway for our first holiday abroad in quite some time, and we will definitely be visiting the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo. Let's see if I can find the picture. To see some Eirik the Red style boats, as well as some of the Nordic fjords and islands that make it into these Icelandic sagas. I love reading things that are linked to the places I'm visiting, and I'll hopefully be learning about some of the historical background to the sagas as well as the natural landscapes they are linked to while I'm there. One thing that I hope to do is maybe film and post some little Sagalong themed videos while I'm in Norway, and post them without any editing or clearing up whatsoever, just while I'm there, to bring some of the fjordy things that we might be seeing to you guys. So if you think that that sounds interesting, let me know and I'll try and do that. No promises though, because the holiday will be the priority. The next book that I finished was a reread. It was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling, which I read aloud to Bo. So we're doing this thing where we read one aloud and then we're going to watch the film, and it's been lovely so far. I don't think I need to say anything more about this here, although I do have a Harry Potter video filmed waiting to be edited if that's your cup of tea. If you want to see any more YouTube videos about Harry Potter, you may well be fed up of them, and that would be reasonable. I think we're up to 7 now. The 7th book I read in January was, for me, completely mind-boggling and unexpected. Obviously, I can't predict the future, but I really do think that this will be one of 2019's standout books for me because it was a very different reading experience from what I generally expect, and I want to reread it already because I'm so confused, but also enjoying my confusion about it and wanting to sort of delve a little bit deeper. This book was White Tears by Harry Kunzru. It came out in 2017, so it was a much newer book than the others I've mentioned, and newer than the average book that I read as well. I picked this one out because it was a key text from a short online course called How to Read a Novel on FutureLearn. If you haven't heard of FutureLearn, I love it as an online learning platform, and the courses are generally free unless you choose to buy a certificate. This one was run by the University of Edinburgh in partnership, I think, with the James Tate Black Memorial Prize. So all the key texts were books that had been considered for the prize. I got White Tears from the library on audiobook. It's actually 7 CDs. And just plunged straight into it without knowing anything more about it other than that it was about 2 young men, Seth and Carter, with a recording studio and an interest in old vinyl records. I think going into it so blind was a brilliant way to take on this story because it completely didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, in so many ways. I think this book really merits its own separate review, so I won't say anything more here, and hopefully I will manage to get that review together at some point. Who knows, maybe not. The 8th book I finished in 2019, I actually finished on the 1st of February, but I feel like it makes more sense to include it here because I was reading it through most of January. This was another book that I picked up because of the FutureLearn course. There were 4 set texts, but I could only get hold of 2 of them. And again, this one was also quite out of my comfort zone. American War by Omar Akkad, also from 2017. American War is set in a dystopian future America where civil war rages once again between the North and South, the Blues and the Reds. In this vivid setting, Akkad focuses in on the story of one young girl from what is called a purple area, so it's a bit of a grey zone. Her name is Sarat, and she and her family become closely entwined with the progression of the war. This was a powerful and well-researched book, I felt, that dealt with vital themes of dehumanisation, radicalisation, destruction, and ecological catastrophe. But for some reason, I had an excessive number of bones to pick with the story, so I am hoping to do another separate review for this one as well. In spite of that, I would say that if I was prone to giving star ratings, I would probably call this a 4-star read, whereas A Lost Lady would be a 3-star read, and the book that I'm coming to next would be a 2-star read. So overall, it was one of the better books that I read in January. From a book that deals with some of the greatest evils that humans can deal upon each other, to a book that pretends to deal with such evil. On the same day that I finished American War, I read the whole of Agatha Christie's Evil Under the Sun. I had started to get a bit ill by this point, so I read this to keep my mind off things, and I was really excited to read it because of how much I loved The Murder of Roger Ackroyd earlier in the month. I was really up for another Poirot, and this one has been on my shelf for a while since I picked it up in a charity shop, hence the massive stickers. However, this was probably my biggest disappointment of the year so far. This was not riveting at all. The narrative approach was dull. There were no interesting characters. I felt like Agatha Christie was just going through the motions rather than really crafting a great mystery. This was published in 1941, so I thought that was in quite a good period for her, but maybe I'm wrong. Actually, the solution to this was almost exactly the same as one from another one of her stories. I'd actually thought about that solution and dismissed it because A, she'd already used it, and B, because it was just way too weak and convoluted. But it turns out weak and convoluted was the answer. The ideal solution to a murder mystery should be beautifully simple and coherent, and completely obvious once you know it. But I had to read the conclusion to this several times before I could understand how this murder had worked, and I still felt it was subpar. Christie is known for being occasionally a bit racist, but it was the ingrained sexism that really troubled me in this book. Essentially, women can be either sexy but dumb, intelligent but cold-hearted, athletic but dull, or straight up clumsy and graceless. Any woman who happens to unite multiple desirable characteristics, such as being intelligent and beautiful, must be remarked upon as being unusual, and also must be ready to give up everything happily to get married as soon as possible, really. On the whole, I felt a bit let down by this one. Do I speak too fast? Because I've only been recording for 20 minutes and I've read through 5 A4 pages. But anyway, I'm not here to dwell on the negatives, although excessively criticising a book is surprisingly fun. I'm really pleased with how much I read in January and the diversity of it, so there were a couple of light classics, a couple of challenging for me contemporary works, and a couple that were just for fun. It felt like a good kind of balance. I also dabbled in a bit of non-fiction. I read the first few chapters of Miranda Green's Exploring the World of the Druids, which I pulled out of my TBR jar at the start of January. I found that it didn't really draw me in very well. It seemed like it was spinning a lot of speculation out of very few sources, and because of that it kept repeating itself. I don't know whether it would get better if I got further into it. I will eventually try to finish this, but I'm not going to prioritise it. I've also read her book, The Gods of the Celts, which is more of like an academic book on the same topic, so I think maybe I find it repetitive because I've read what she has to say on this subject before, and this time she's just geared it specifically towards like druidy stuff. Non-fiction wise, I also read a portion of This Republic of Suffering by Drew Gilpin Faust, as recommended by Old Blues Chapter and Verse for the Mortality project that he's doing, and I may come back and read the rest of that in future. I also dabbled in the poems of Tennyson, another one from the TBR jar. I read the introduction by T Herbet Warren from 1910, so I think that was less than 20 years after he died. Essentially, the introduction to this was a bit of a hagiography, if I've used the right word there. It didn't really tell me anything particularly insightful. And just a few of the beginning poems, as well as starting out on In Memoriam AHH, which I'm going to be reading over the course of the year. Poetry reading seems to be having a bit of a moment here on BookTube, so I have picked out one of the shorter poems to share with you. I should say that this is definitely one of his least serious poems. Second Song to the Owl. Thy to wits are lulled, I wot, thy to woos of yesternight, which upon the dark afloat so took echo with delight, that her voice untuneful grown wears all day a fainter tone. I would mock thy chant anew, but I cannot mimic it. Not a whit of thy to woo, thee to woo to thy to wit, thee to woo to thy to wit, with a lengthened loud halloo, to woo to wit, to woo. It's almost a bit of a tongue twister. And on a more serious note, I thought I would read you my favourite verse so far of In Memoriam. You okay? Oh, wow! Is it a spinning top?
Yeah, except it doesn't spin because it hasn't got enough mass.
I'm not very good at using spinning tops. Bo got a lathe for his birthday and he just made this beautiful little spinning top. It's like a little mushroom. Mushroom. Okay, let's try again with that reading. So this is In Memoriam AHH and it's the second part. Old yew which graspeth at the stones that name the underlying dead. Thy fibres net the dreamless head, thy roofs are wrapped around the bones. The seasons bring the flower again, and bring the firstling to the flock, and in the dusk of thee the clock beats out the little lives of men. Oh, not for thee the glow, the bloom, who changest not in any gale, nor branding summer suns avail to touch thy 1,000 years of gloom. And gazing on thee, sullen tree, sick for thy stubborn hardihood, I seem to fail from out my blood and grow incorporate to thee. Also, in part 6, probably my favourite line in this so far is never morning wore to evening, but some heart did break, because it's just very, very true. It's a very unselfish notion for Tennyson to be putting his grief into the context of the griefs of so many other people just constantly happening, like constantly every day people are dying. I found it interesting that he chose to do that. So that was everything that I read really in January. I'm excited for February. Obviously, I'm going to be spending 2.5 weeks of it in Norway, which is always going to be an exciting thing. But reading-wise for me, there will be more of Sagalong, and like I said, maybe some Norway videos for that. Then I'm reading some other Norwegian things if there's time, like Kristin Lavransdatter, The Bridal Wreath by Sigrid Undset, who I believe she was born outside of Norway, but she spent most of her life in Norway, which was recently reviewed by Britta Bola at the Second Shelf because she won the Nobel Prize for Literature, I believe. And I'm also going to read some plays by Ibsen. I will be reading from the Kindle, really for the first time, which will be interesting. I don't know if I told you yet how my mum tricked me into accepting the Kindle, but basically she recommended a book to me and I said, oh, I think I would like to read that. And she said, oh, next time you visit, I will give you a copy. And I came back and she gave me a copy loaded onto the Kindle. Yeah. She's very cunning. But anyway, this is the first trip away when I will have one, and it's definitely going to make the suitcase a lot lighter. The only physical book I'm going to take is The Prisoner of Azkaban. We have nearly finished The Chamber of Secrets. I don't know if you can see there. So by the time we go away, we should be on to Azkaban. Because obviously I will be on holiday, I probably won't really watch any booktube next month apart from the Sagalong videos if I can, and I will probably be even less involved than usual in terms of commenting on stuff. I know I'm normally a couple of weeks late for things anyway, and I know obviously nobody is likely to notice whether or not I'm commenting, but I feel like I need to say it anyway. Because of having a Norway theme, I'm going to miss out on the other cool February readathons like Blackathon, but I'm going to be trying to work a diversity of authors into my reading mix across the year. So I'm watching the recommendation videos for that so that I know some authors to kind of look out for. I did do a TBR jar pick for February as well, and I got The Tombs of Atuan by Ursula Guin, which is the second in the Earthsea Quartet. I have started reading that, but not got very far because it is surprisingly difficult for an ill brain to understand. In the meantime, until I feel better, I'm reading Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey as a bit of like a cozy comfort read. And it's so funny. Like this time around, I'm really comparing her to Oscar Wilde because just every sentence is wit. There is just wit everywhere. Then coming up in March, we have the March of the Mammoths, which was recently announced. The only book on our shelves that is on my list to read that is also over 800 pages is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I have had repeatedly recommended to me by various family members and friends. And that is 1,006 pages long, so I think that's going to keep me busy for most of March. Around this, I might also read some short stories. I have potentially signed myself up to read some James Joyce short stories from the Dubliners, but we shall see. And I'm pretty bad at remembering my own reading plans, so we will see if I actually read those things in March or not. Probably not. Anyway, thank you for joining me in my very long-winded first wrap-up. Let me know if this is what wrap-ups are supposed to be like. And if you've got any thoughts on any of the books that I've mentioned, do talk to me about it in the comments because I've been really enjoying talking to you in the comments recently. And otherwise, happy reading, happy start to 2019, and I will speak to you soon. Or potentially I will speak to you after I get back from Norway. Bye. Hit myself in the glasses.